The next reading from the Lord's Word comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought to you my son, who has a mute spirit. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought the son to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And our final reading is from the book Arcana Celestia, portions of number 1937. Within all self-compulsion towards what is good, a certain freedom exists, which is not recognized as freedom while a person is exercising self-compulsion, but is nevertheless inwardly present. Take, for example, someone who is willing to risk death for the sake of some particular end, or one who is willing to endure physical pain for the sake of their health. There's a willingness and so a certain freedom in those actions, though while he is taking risks or suffering pain, these remove any feeling of willingness or freedom. So also with those who compel themselves to do what is good. Present within them, there is a willingness and freedom, which is the source of and the reason for their self-compulsion. That is to say, they compel themselves for the reason that they may obey the things which the Lord has commanded, and that their souls may become saved after death. And within these, a still greater reason is present, though the person himself is not aware of it, namely the Lord's kingdom, and indeed the Lord himself. Present in all freedom is a person's life, because present there is his love. Whatever a person does from love appears to him as freedom. But within that freedom, when the person practices self-compulsion, setting himself against evil and falsity, and doing what is good, heavenly love is present, which the Lord instills at that time. Amen. Is it more satisfying to have something or to earn it? To make that question a little tougher, is it more satisfying to work for something, to really try and then fail to get it, or to simply have that thing because you've always had it? Which of those two experiences is more likely to leave us feeling at peace with who we are, which is more likely to leave us feeling alive. We all know that what's easy isn't always what will make us happiest. Today I'm going to be talking about the things that we choose to fight for. The teachings of the new church tell us that there are 5 laws of divine providence, 5 universal and unchanging laws that define how the Lord governs creation. The third of these laws is particularly relevant to today's subject. The first law has to do with our freedom. The Lord will never take away our internal or spiritual freedom. The second law is that the Lord won't change us from within until we've worked to change ourselves from without. In the book Divine Providence, the third law is given to us as follows. It is a law of divine providence that a person not be compelled by external means to think and will, thus to believe and love things having to do with religion, but that the person bring himself to do so and at times compel himself. The first part of that law states that nothing can force us to think what we don't think, to believe what we don't believe, or to love what we don't love. Specifically, the passage is saying that we can't be compelled with regard to religion, but religion just means how we live. It means the things we believe and the choices that we make that define what we really are. How could we have any freedom at all if we weren't the ones who made those choices? If we weren't the ones who chose what we believe? If those abilities were taken away from us, we'd stand for nothing. We'd be a meaningless heap of whatever anyone told us to be. We'd have no identity. And we know this instinctively. We all know how automatically and how forcefully we reject anything that says, you have to believe what I tell you, or you have to love what I tell you. That reflex is so strong that it says in the heavenly doctrines that human beings strive after the forbidden. It's so important to us that we make our own choices, that we're inclined to do exactly the opposite of what we're told, just to prove that we can. Obviously, that tendency can get us into trouble, but fundamentally it's there to protect us, to protect our freedom. But these laws of divine providence don't exist simply to give us the freedom to keep on loving what we already happen to love. The Lord wants us to be spiritually free, but freedom is more than just permission to do whatever comes naturally, whatever comes easily. We're allowed to just do what's easy. But a lot of what comes naturally to us isn't so great. We're naturally inclined to put ourselves first and others second. We're naturally inclined to all kinds of ugly feelings and selfish reactions. The Lord wants more than that for us. So He won't allow us to be compelled by external means, but that law of divine providence states that at times we've got to compel ourselves. Self-compulsion is nobody's favorite thing. If it was easy, it wouldn't be called compulsion. We might wonder sometimes why the system is built this way. Why did the Lord make it so that we have to force ourselves to be good? Why does it have to be so hard? The Lord doesn't want our lives to be hard, but He knows that some things are worth fighting for. And He wants to teach us to see the same thing. Let's look at that story from the Gospel of Mark about the boy with the demon as an illustration of this. Think of the father in that story. Clearly, this man loved his son and grieved for his condition. We don't know what he believed, but we can guess. Like most of us, he probably believed first and foremost in the things that he saw and the things that made sense to him. But it seems that he was willing to believe in miracles. He must have heard of the Lord and of His power and wondered, maybe almost fearfully, is this real? Is this man really who he says he is? What might he have been thinking as he went to find this man who might be able to end his son's lifelong condition? Maybe this is my chance. Maybe this is the day that my son is healed. What if it doesn't work? What if this is my last hope? Should I even dare to hope? And imagine what that father felt when the Lord's disciples tried to cast out the demon and couldn't. There must have been a voice in him that cried out, "It's failed." It was too good to be true. Surely this man was tempted over and over to just give up hope. But he stayed with the disciples until the Lord came. And then he begged the Lord, "If you can do anything, have compassion on us." And the Lord answered, "If you can believe, all things are possible for him who believes." On one level, that answer is infuriating. And there might be a part of us that wants to cry out on this father's behalf, "If you can just show me that it's okay, I will believe." But this man chose to say, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." And that's a profound way to answer the Lord. He didn't for an instant deny that he was filled with doubt, but he chose to declare to the Lord that he wanted to believe. He was choosing to believe. And that was enough for the Lord. He cast the demon out. The Lord did not deem this man's belief inadequate because there was a part of him that doubted. Far from it, the father's belief was all the more powerful because he had to fight for it, because he believed when it wasn't easy, because he compelled himself. It's easy to fall into a trap of thinking that we should feel inspired to do the right thing, or that goodness should well up in us spontaneously, and that if it doesn't, something's wrong and it's a lost cause. It's easy for us to think that struggling spiritually means that we're worse than other people, to think that our struggle is a sign that it's too hard and that we're not capable of getting to where we believe we ought to be. And that can feed into a temptation to give up. Giving up is easy. Sticking with what we're familiar with is what comes naturally to us. And so we can end up saying, "I'm never going to understand these teachings from the Word, these deep ideas. I'm not that kind of person. I've tried to kick this bad habit and I couldn't. So this is who I am. My spouse and I just don't love each other. Time to call it quits." But in a way, it's the opposites of these statements that are the truth. Because we only ever struggle with something when something that we love is at stake. In arenas where we just don't care, there's nothing to fight about. Hell only ever attacks things that we love. We're told evil spirits never fight against any other things than those which a person loves. And the more intensely he loves them, the more fiercely do those spirits fight. The very fact that we're fighting, even if it feels like we're losing, means that some part of us loves the thing we're fighting for. Take marriage as an example. Imagine you didn't care in the slightest about marriage. If that were the case, you wouldn't bother getting married. If you were married and didn't care, you wouldn't work on your marriage. You wouldn't feel torn if there was a part of you that wanted to commit adultery. You wouldn't feel hurt if the marriage ended. If you didn't care in the least about marriage, your marriage would be easy because you just wouldn't have one. But if you love marriage, marriage will be hard, at least sometimes. Because hell hates marriage, and the more persistently we strive for true married love, the harder hell pushes back. We're told, as is the intensity of our love, so is the dreadfulness of our temptations. That dreadfulness sure sounds bad. But which of these two possibilities, caring or not caring, offers us the greater freedom? It is true that we are free to reject every good thing that's ever offered to us. But compare that kind of freedom to the freedom we taste when we look hell in the face and say, "You stand in the way of something I want, and I will not back down. I know what I love." When we stick with our default and don't choose to fight or to compel ourselves, it still feels like we love things. It still feels like we're making choices, and we are. But we also don't see how much we're simply swallowing whatever hell gives us. When we don't stand up against whatever evil is inside us, that evil runs the show. It justifies whatever it wants and spews out powerful feelings that push us around. That state is called hellish freedom, and hellish freedom is slavery. In contrast, we read in that lesson from Arcana Celestia that within all self-compulsion towards what is good, a certain freedom exists. We're told further on in that passage that when we're in temptation, when we're fighting for something with everything we've got, more freedom is present than there would ever be in any state outside those times. To put all this very simply, if we don't fight for anything, we don't get to choose what we love. If we've never fought for anything, we have no idea what real freedom looks like. And conversely, what we're willing to fight for is what we love. The Lord knows that self-compulsion is hard, and He leaves it to us nevertheless to compel ourselves because He wants us to discover that true freedom. He wants us to know that feeling of victory, that clear and soaring feeling that we know who we are and what we want, and hell cannot take that from us. So what are you willing to fight for? There's a lot of causes out there in the world. A lot of things to love. We can't love all of them. At least we can't put all of them first. What are you willing to love? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to stick with no matter how hard it gets? Those choices, more than anything else, are what define who we are. Self-compulsion can feel like a lonely thing. We have to feel like we alone are choosing what we're choosing and battling what we're battling, or else our self-compulsion isn't really self-compulsion. If we're not choosing it alone, then something else is imposing it on us. We feel like we're alone, but that's just the appearance. The Lord is always with us, and in truth, He's the one who fights for us. None of us are strong enough to fight evil on our own. When we compel ourselves to do what's right, we're choosing freely to step forward and receive the Lord's help. We're choosing to say to Him, I want the kind of life and the kind of freedom that you are offering. I will go where you lead. With God, all things are possible. And when we receive His help, He can show us how to love whatever we choose to love. As we experience it, this looks like standing in the midst of our enemies, saying, Lord, I will do anything for this. I will take up my cross here on this ground. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. The Lord knows that these choices are hard. The reward is victory and heavenly freedom. In the book of John, we read, a woman, when she is in labor, has sorrow because her hour has come. But as soon as she has given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Therefore, you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you. Amen.